especially when you think of all the transformation, northern transformation projects, southern transformation projects, and how we are going to design, think about infrastructure of especially our science facilities as we move into Hobart, into the CBD, the Launceston Transformation Project. I think that Andy will give us a lot of good ideas today. Okay, over to you, Andy.
Okay, thank you, Caroline. Just to check, do I have remote control here for the computer, or otherwise, because then I can walk around while not having to touch the keyboard all the time. Carry everything with me traveling. So, yes, hello, and thanks for inviting me, Caroline and colleagues. I'm Andy, indeed. Yeah, about this funny thing, this is what I only use when I'm in an Anglo-Saxon country, because we don't have that title in the Netherlands, so I can never use a title for a night in the Netherlands. It's just, so I love to do it when, when I'm in an English-speaking country. I got this, it's a sort of a royal award that thousands of people get every year for things they've done for society. So, yeah, I'm sort of proud of it, of course, being Knight in the Order of the Dutch Lion, which I've never seen a lion in Holland, but okay. So, yeah, I'm going to push you through a presentation that shows sort of a range of things that I do with my team in the Netherlands and with my students, which is all focused on sustainability. To first introduce where I'm from, so the Netherlands is over there, there's Tasmania, so it's quite opposite the other side of the earth. And to look at the Netherlands, Delft, where I'm from, is to the western part. It's in between The Hague and Rotterdam, which I'm better known, I guess. And as you can see, Holland is a busy country. So this is Delft. It's like a tiny version of Amsterdam, if you know images of Amsterdam. So also 17th century flourishing city. We're known for our Delft blue pottery, which we stole from the Chinese, but has become famous in Delft. This is the city as it was in the Middle Ages. It has now 102 inhabitants, 102,000 inhabitants, around 25,000 TU Delft students, about 5,000 FTE staff, and there's 46 dead members of the royal family, which you can find here in the inner city under the new church. So every time there's a royal family member dying, they're buried here in Delft. And that's because basically our nation was founded in our city when William of Orange was murdered in Delft when he was holding residence there. So ever since, we are actually the royal city of the Netherlands. We're proud of that, of course. And it has TU Delft, which is the largest technical university in the Netherlands, with 8 different faculties. And well, I'm with architecture and the built environment, and we're now accommodated in this old 1920s building, which was refurbished completely. I'll come back to that later. After our previous building, which was from 1968, my year of birth, when it burned down because of a coffee machine and a water leakage. So water and electricity do not go well together. And these are some examples of the work that my department does. So we do a lot of things in sustainability and innovation, basically. The faculty itself raises architects, urban planners, building managers, building technologists, landscape architects, and I'm more in the technical area, technical architecture, you could say. So what I want to start with is show you a little film to warm you up. And I hope that it will work. If I push this, then it should go onto the internet. You can't see it? Oh yeah, you can. That's good. Maybe I should expand it.
Sporting, lovely. It makes you strong and fit, you sweat out your laziness, and you can lose your energy. And the power often is impressive. This is a typical Dutch couple in a typical Dutch dwelling. Everything is quiet, and you would expect that they don't use any energy, but while these two are asleep, the house still requires 200 watts of power. Power is the amount of energy one uses or produces in a certain period. Unit, joule per second. Or in other words, watt.
60 watt erbij. Dat breng je niet na de hele nacht. Snappeling. OT nummer 2, kom maar bij. En kom jongens, kom op.
Hé, lui Lammers. Ik maak alvast een ontbijtje.
Nummers 3, 4 en 5 erbij. Ieder 300 watt.
Making coffee, 900 watts. If you keep the hot plate on, the demand will remain 900 watts. Energy is power times the period of time that this power is delivered. Unit, joule, watt hour or calorie. Leave your coffee machine on for 20 minutes and you will have used 300 watt hours.
4 man erbij, 250 watt. Kom op mensen, kom op.
Toasting bread, 1 kilowatt. But it can even get worse.
Tien erbij. Roei is niet tot 19. Aan de slag. 250 watt, 11.
The energy required for heat is immense. When the heating is turned up, the boiler switches on and then demands at least 2.5 kilowatts.
Nummers 2 tot en 9. Op de plaats, rust. Honderd watt erbij. Nummer 2 aan de slag. Alle hands aan dek. Iedereen aan de ergometer.
Showering is one of the most energy-squandering activities at home. The tank of a boiler has a certain stock of hot water, but this needs to be heated up when it is emptied and cold water is entering the tank. When a boiler switches on, because someone is showering, approximately 10 kilowatts of power is demanded. In other words, 10,000 watts. This means 30 rowers, each delivering 333 watts. An insane amount of power for just a shower.
Jezus, hoe lang blijft een mens wel niet douchen?
We zakken weg. Kom, doorgaan. Meer benen. Nu, gaan.
Six minutes of showering and you have already used 1 kilowatt hour. 12 minutes, 2 kilowatt hours. Half an hour, 5 kilowatt hours.
Laat lopen.
De douche deed weer raar.
Alweer, dat is maf.
eens doorgaan. In totaal 1500 watt. Kom op! Kom op! Kom op! Doorgaan!
Ik zie je straks.
Succes.
Ja, dankjewel.
Good luck for our rowers, who for 8 hours only have to deliver the basic power of the house until the couple returns. Unfortunately, today the basic power is unnecessarily high because the thermostat has not been switched down, but it can be done. Although, without noticing, an invisible world is hiding in the house and in the equipment we use. Everything we use at home costs energy. A Dutch household requires approximately 1800 watts. Based on the power our rowers deliver, 250 watts on average, we would require 7 rowers permanently. But this is on average. The peaks in usage can sometimes go up to 20 kilowatts. That is almost impossible. Or is it? This is the same house, but with improvements, such as extra thermal insulation, a heat pump and solar cells. In the open online course Zero Energy Design, TU Delft will teach you how to liberate all rowers from their slave labor. How? By making the house energy neutral.
So, this was made as a teaser film for our massive open online course. So it's available at the moment, by the way. It's running now, and you can still enroll if you are interested. Of course, for me, this was a dream come true that I finally had some funding to make this funny film, which is also especially meant to make people understand what we are talking about, because sometimes people make jokes like, okay, let's just connect electricity to our home trainer cycle, for instance, but it hardly does anything. It's only 100 watts, and rowers are very efficient, so 250 watts is quite a lot to do for 1 hour, actually, if you've tried it yourself in the gym. So that's one thing. Second, what I wanted to focus on is carbon emissions of a household. So if we look at the same Dutch household and what it typically uses for energy, mobility, waste management, water management, then it's 8.5 tons of CO2 per year. And we compare that to other European countries where we did this European research project. And then you see that the Netherlands is fairly high. There's only one island here that came higher. But what is 8.5 tons of CO2? We're quite illiterate about that. So how can we translate it? Well, we can translate it in forest area. Forest area that should be planted to compensate for the carbon emissions, so that the trees grow on carbon. And then we need 0.63 hectares of forest for 8.5 tons of CO2. How much is that? Well, you call it soccer, we call it football, because we think it's the only sport where you really only use your foot, your feet. So, but it's one football pitch, approximately. So every Dutch household should have a forest the size of a football pitch behind their home. Well, maybe in the countryside it's possible, but not in most of the cities. So this is rather impossible. Now, it's very easy for me to say how everyone should behave and how we can make buildings sustainable. But the thing is, of course, if we want to become a sustainable society, which is circular, carbon neutral, climate adaptive, then we have to become that ourselves. You can't say tell your neighbors they have to do it and you're not doing it. So that's why I keep track of my own carbon emissions as well, and to see how I can get them down. So this is an overview of that, and this is my house. It's nearly zero. The only thing that I still emit CO2 with is the heat pump system I share with my neighbors, because I think the power for the heat pump is grey power. I don't purchase it, so I guess it's some sort of bad coal-fired, gas-fired electricity. But that's the only one. So, but that's almost nearly zero. This is my old-timer camper van, 25 years old this year. Very proud of it, but of course polluting diesel engine, so not very well. But I only use it for holiday, so I don't use it for normal commuter travel. This is my vegetarian diet, which would be much higher if I ate meat. And this is half a trip to Vietnam. I had to go to Vietnam for my work, one of these other exchange projects, and I connected a holiday to it, and then I accounted the flight back to me myself. So you see that all the savings I established in my house were completely overrun by one half a trip. So that says a bit about the effect of flying. And I also do work, of course, and a part of what I do in my work should be accounted for me as part of the organization. So this is the faculty building. So here you see it. So this is our faculty building. And you see something strange happened in 2013. That's because of a renovation project. So we reduced the heat demand by 50% by just adding some post insulation, replacing the building surfaces. Electricity is still the same, but the heating went down by 50%. But then all these things together are here in the lower part. These are the bars that you saw beforehand, and there's this blue one. And that's flying, of course. This is the level of average Dutchman, without flying, without boats accounted for. And you see that I sort of stayed below it before 2014, and then it went wrong. And that's also how I found out that KLM gives people, frequent flyers, a silver card when they reach 15 tons of CO2. Then say, congratulations, you've reached 15 tons of CO2 emission, now you can get a silver card. And they also have gold and they also have platinum, so imagine how high your emissions have to be before you get that. Of course, this is not very sustainable, so that's why I had this card for 2 years, and then I lost it, because I dropped under the line. But I still had 12 tons of CO2 in 2018. But that's when I bought this carbon certificate, carbonkiller.org. What they do is they purchase these carbon certificates on the market and then destroy them. So for me, I paid about 300 euros, so about, what is it, $450 to compensate for my carbon emissions. That's how you see that what you pay normally on an air ticket for carbon compensation, it's not the right figure that you pay for it. But then I became carbon neutral, and now the industry have to do their best to reduce 12 tons. So, and of course it's many more people than just me. But it goes to show that we all have to do something. So it's not just a matter of organizations having to do with it, or the government, or companies. It's everyone individually. Now you might say, I'm not sure about this here, but hold on, carbon emissions, I don't believe in climate change, so why would I do anything in that direction? Well, that's why I include some of the slides. And funnily, I've used this slide for a long time in the Netherlands to explain that your country, Australia, has sort of met both ends of the extremes of climate change. Terrible temperatures and floods where there never were any floods. So I always explain to the Dutch people, okay, we haven't had a disaster here for years, but Australia, that's where people know that's happening. Well, luckily, recently we have also run into extremes in the Netherlands. 2018 was the hottest year on record and also the driest year. We're still suffering from that. But apart from that, a hot year doesn't explain why there's climate change, because these things happen. There's a records broken every day. We can also still have a very extreme cold year. It's possible. But of course it's a trend. The last 10 hottest years within the last 12 years. So that's something really serious. And apart from looking at air temperatures, the oceans say much more about climate change, because they heat up very, very slowly, and they won't release their heat for a very long time. It will take decades for them to cool down again. And we see that the measurements in the oceans of absorbed energy has increased immensely over the last 10 years. So this is a very clear trend. Now, if people accept that there's climate change, you always hear from the skeptics, the next step is always to, that climate has always changed. Well, that's true. Here you see a cycle from 800,000 years ago, measured from ice cores at the poles. We see these, the colder periods, ice ages, glacial periods, and then warmer periods, ice age, global. But of course what's happening here is ridiculously extreme. And if we zoom in at the last few thousand years, we see that actually since the last ice age, which was here, about 12,000 years ago, we should have been in a cooler period actually. We're sort of in a geological cooler period in between ice ages. So what is happening here with the temperature is rather extreme, and it's just us responsible for that. Well, if people accept that, okay, it's an extreme thing happening, but it's not CO2. We humans are not responsible. Well, if all the cycles would have been natural, if the temperature would be reliant only on natural cycles, then it would be this blue line. So the temperature would, on average, have stayed the same approximately. If it would have been 100% reliant on carbon emissions, then it would have been this. And if you sum both up, you get the red line. And the red line quite meticulously follows the measurements in black. So it's very obvious to all scientists in climate science that the temperature is a function of both natural cycles and CO2. However, we see since 1900, CO2 has become predominant and is becoming ever more predominant. So the natural cycles hardly have an influence anymore. And this is also why this was given a golden standard in science, meaning that the probability that climate change, as it's happening now, is not caused by CO2 emissions is only 1 in 3.5 million. You can't get it any more certain than that, because there's not 100% scientific certainty. That doesn't exist. So we can't get any more certain than that. It is CO2 and it is human influence. And that's also visible when we put CO2 concentration against temperatures. It's almost in one straight line. So it's linked one-on-one. Now the only thing that remains is how will it develop further? So climate change in temperature. Well, this is the aim of the Katowice agreement. Paris was 2 degrees, but scientists already know that the 1.5 degrees will not be achieved. It's impossible. We've gone too far already, so we have to try to stick to 2 degrees, but it will be really, really difficult. And ecologists have trouble trying to sort of forecast what is happening if the temperature rises more than 2 degrees. Then there's no models basically that can predict what will happen to the Earth. So we have to really work hard to stay low on this. And well, forecasting is impossible. Well, forecasts so far have been relatively optimistic. So it's every time the IPCC is sort of changing their forecast in a more negative way. The last one a few days ago was about flooding. There's more people going to be flooded rather than what they said beforehand. Well, for my own country, this means that this is so the Netherlands is now here, right? If we zoom in, and it becomes a bit clear. This is Delft, where I live and work. So if sea level rises and we have some sort of disaster happening, then this is an option. We have a new coastline. And the biggest part of the Netherlands is actually become sea. And there's a few dunes where you can still stay, but the rest is gone, and we have new cities along the coast. Well, this is one of the reasons, not the main reason, because it's not that scientists in Delft are only concerned about themselves, but this is one of the reasons that TU Delft, as one of the first university, or maybe the first university, came up with a position on behalf of the whole university on climate change and climate action. So it's sort of this position paper discusses climate science, climate mitigation, and climate adaptation solutions. Well, and that's basically also what I've been teaching students so far, that the big challenge for sustainability is fourfold. We have to design and engineer things that are climate adaptive, be ready for extreme weather, because it's already happening, as you've seen. We have to become carbon neutral, so only make plants that are completely reliant on renewables. Circular, so it has to be part of the circular economy. And not least, adding value, because people will never accept it if it's only a matter of costs and change, which people find difficult. There's a lot of vested interest, so you have to come up with an alternative that has added value. These 4 challenges has never been an issue with previous generations of architects and engineers and planners. So this is really difficult. Okay, what are the expectations for climate? Well, we know it's going to get wetter in most parts of the world, also drier in other parts. I live in a country where it's going to be wetter on average, because on average means that we will have severe rainfall, but also drier periods in summertime. You've encountered those extremes as well. Well, in Holland, of course, we know what flooding is. Our country is basically one from the sea, so in that sense, we're sort of experienced in that. But a large part of the country is already below sea level, and with the sea level rising, that part of the country is increasing, of course. So we have a lot of trouble keeping it dry at the moment. But there is a positive way to look at it. We can also come up with new designs for buildings that are flood-proof, coming from, say, traditional mounds in the landscape to houses on poles, floodable ground floors, floating houses to, for instance, aquarium glass. Why not? You see a different biotope when you're sitting there behind your glass. It's nice to see some new fish, or maybe neighbors that don't have a safe house to float by. Or we take a mini polder, and a mini polder, but what I didn't draw here is that we need a basement with food for at least 2 weeks, because otherwise people can't come out. Or they should have a boat to do shopping, of course. Anyway, that's one solution. Another one is from a friend of mine, Greg Keefe, who is a professor in Belfast. And he did a project in the past in Nelson, in England, looking at their typical terraced houses and how they could become 100% sustainable. Well, first is capture stormwater and store it. Then my next step would be, okay, use it also as an energy storage. Of course, normally the water is cold, so it can be cold storage, but if you put a heat pump in between, two different tanks, then it can cool down one side and it can heat up the other side. Who of you has a heat pump at home? I see quite a lot of fingers. Those are the people with fridges, I guess, and freezers, and sometimes even a heat pump as a heating device. It's a very common thing. So a heat pump just extracts heat from one source and gives it to another source. That's the basic principle. So you can combine heat and cold storage in the same system. And then if you have a heat and cold storage, you can also use that for cold water fish breeding, or hot water, tropical water fish, shrimps. So it can become part of the food chain as well. Now here they even have pigs in the backyard eating organic waste from the people, but I wouldn't go that far in a city. If you know how pig farms smell, you wouldn't do that. Anyway, but it's a solution. So it's about creative thinking about combining. It's also possible to, if you look at these typical terraced houses, to put a sustainable skin about it, involving all the technology that might improve the house. That way the people can still live there while the refurbishments are ongoing, and it could improve the house, which is now very inefficient, to a better one. Well, this is what we did in the so-called Solar Decathlon in 2014. A Solar Decathlon is a competition of university teams that build a house that's completely self-sufficient. It's comparable to the Solar Challenge with solar cars. You've had it here in Australia last week, finishing. And this was our entry to the competition in Versailles in 2014. So this was a typical terraced house, and as you see, we cut through the neighbors and then showed how it could be made a very sustainable one with a nice glass house attached, which increased also the house and made it possible to grow food and herbs. And it has become one of the most ecological areas in Delft, because this was being rebuilt in Delft after the competition. And now it's flourishing really with a lot of insects and birds and so on, because we collaborated with an ecological organization that suggested the right plants for our climate, and it has led to much increasement. Now, climate change in terms of heat needs to be looked at also in terms of how much do we need for heating and cooling. You know perhaps the idea of heating degree days and cooling degree days. So that's the number of hours, actually, not really days, number of hours that the outside temperature is too far away from your comfort temperature inside. So it means if it's too cold, then you have to heat, and if it's too warm, you have to cool. In the Netherlands, the cooling degree days are much lower than the heating degree days, if you combine them, but it's changing now. So with offices, it's already 50-50. Now, if we look at the Netherlands, we see at the coast, and we overlap those two, then the coast is actually relatively stable. There's not very cold winters, not very hot summers. And in the east, even with our tiny country, we have a big difference in extreme temperatures in the east. So it can be really freezing still and hot in summertime. But the houses are still designed in the same way, so there's no difference in the way we design, which is unlogical. And now, of course, we have this new reality of these extreme temperatures. This summer we had a record broken from 38.6 to 40.7 degrees. So there's 2 degrees difference. And the old record was from 1944. That's like breaking the world record for the 100-meter sprint from, what is it, 9.52 seconds now to 8 seconds. Sort of comparable. It's an incredible increase. But even then, this is measured outside cities usually. So temperatures are always measured in the countryside or near airports. And we know that in the city, temperatures are much higher due to the urban heat island effect. So I can tell people that Eindhoven, for instance, which is here, which is one of the hottest cities in the Netherlands, it's very close to where the maximum temperature was measured. I think it was 48 degrees here, because that's how much difference you have in a city. So 48 degrees in a city, that's lethal for people who are temporarily weak or old or newborn kids. That's of course due to the urban heat island effect. You as Australians know that probably. The main cause is the sun that's being absorbed by material, stony material, tarmac, and then released at nighttime or later in the day. But also anthropogenic heat, so emitted by vehicles, buildings, air conditioners. Air conditioners are sort of heat pumps that take away heat from inside and blow it away outside. So it's heating up the city. And of course, little green. So if we look back at the map, this is just an example for the Netherlands, but actually the climate map should be different. We should have a totally different climate map if we include the cities. Those are local tropical areas in a temperate climate. So we need to know more about hotspots, the places where where the temperatures are much higher. We also need to know about cool spots, because there's forests, there's flowing water corridors that are cooler, and we can design with them also. And we need to understand precipitation and drought, of course, better, because there's also differences across the country. And I saw that Tasmania also is quite different in climate, so we will have a totally different map here as well. So this is what I already explained here. So cooling inside is very nice for your own home, but you are basically destroying the climate in the city, making it much worse. And this is in Tokyo. This was a gay club, by the way. But okay, they're cool, but not outside. I think that in the near future we will start to work more on climatizing our cities, as we are climatizing our buildings right now. So we don't have any comfort regulations for cities, but I think that will be a necessity if we go towards the 50 degrees in summertime. It's impossible. So we have to come up with urban cooling systems. And a few examples of how to do that. You can work with albedo. That's the reflective capacity of materials. Here you see a neighborhood in Amsterdam. The current situation, the city wants to create parking lots, which in this case, if they had dark roofs and wide walls would lead to much higher temperatures in this neighborhood. But if you would have light-colored roofs, darker facades, and semi-permeable pavements, then the temperatures would go down compared to the current situation. So design can also make things better rather than just stabilizing the best. So we can be much more efficient there. Well, plants anyway are of course natural climatizers. They are natural air conditioners. Apart from shading, they also help to cool down the city by their evaporation. Of course, you need enough water for that, but that's what's happening. And it's quite common nowadays to use plants also in the indoor to improve the air quality indoors. Newer solutions, which need to be studied further in academic situations, are, for instance, using solar chimneys, not just for buildings, but also for urban situations. For instance, if you would have a black wall in your country facing north, then that black wall would really become hot, and then air would rise right next to that wall, and air can't just rise, there must be other air coming in then. And if that air comes from a park, for instance, through a corridor in a street, then you sort of create a sort of airflow that brings in cooler air from elsewhere. So you can use that also as a design measure. I found this out when I was in Mexico a long time ago already. I was stood here on this temple, and you could feel the breeze basically coming in from below, because this was heating up, created an airflow, and then, so I knew that the priest that was staring out the heart of some enemy here had actually good labor conditions. It was very, very well organized. Anyway, another solution that will be a solution for warmer climates, not necessarily the Netherlands, but Mediterranean countries, and maybe also your mainland Australia, is to cool down public spaces like squares. Now, cooling down sounds like a lot of energy you put in to cool it down, but I think you should see it in reverse. It's a big, giant solar collector. So you run water through the pavement with tubes, or through the tarmac, and then this water basically is heated up by the surface, and then you can store it for use later, or direct use for hot water purposes or something. And thereby you cool down the city, and you create a heat source. So in that sense, this is actually joining the goals of climate adaptation and mitigation, and I believe that there's more of these examples that can help to make cities better. And if you look at those cities that have to go into an energy transition from fossil to renewable, this is a map of Rotterdam. It's showing in 3D the heat demand in Rotterdam in blue, those, with the solar potential of heat in yellow. This is geothermal in the underground, and sometimes here you see orange lines. Those are the main roads that could serve as solar collectors as well. And we have these little dots. These are sources of waste heat coming from supermarkets or swimming pools or light industries. So this we find out through research. At first we have to reduce the demand, because we see that the demand is higher than the natural availability of heat. We have to reuse the waste heat that is emitted in the city, otherwise it heats up the city further, and it's a waste of heat, of course. And we have to produce renewable energy within the city as much as possible. Now I will demonstrate this how we looked at it from another city in Holland, Amsterdam. In Holland we are now currently talking about getting in line with Paris. Going to Paris means actually getting in line with the Paris Climate Agreement. Well, here you see how much CO2 you emit if you travel by, oh, it says vliegtuig, that means airplane, car and train. The boat is worst. So if you take a boat to Paris, that's the worst way to get there. But Amsterdam has thought about their transition by looking at electricity on the left-hand side. It will increase because of the growth of the city, but also because of electric vehicles, heat pumps instead of gas boilers. And gradually, the infill of electricity produced by gas and coal has to be replaced by renewables. So PV, solar, wind, a little bit of waste incineration, but not so much, because in a circular economy you hardly have any waste in the future. And Amsterdam can do a lot, but they have to import still 40% from the region. Because it's such a dense city, you don't have enough surface to produce the electricity you need. In heat, there's also an increase because of the growth, but new buildings should be energy neutral, so they should not be a problem. The old buildings can be renovated to a certain extent, so that demand can go down, and then the remainder has to be filled in with temperature at different levels. And the better your house is, the lower the temperature your heating system can be served with. And then you can replace the high temperature heat from gas to a lot of other sources. For this, we looked at the city and the neighborhoods built in different eras, because this said something about in how far you can renovate or intervene in the building and where you cannot do it. Well, based on that, the Amsterdam City the planning department is already planning to extend the heat network that's already here and here, to expand it towards the older part of Amsterdam, because actually the newer areas of Amsterdam don't need this high temperature heat. They can be served with lower temperatures, whereas the inner city, of course, still demands a lot of high temperature heat because they can't be post-insulated because of their monumental status or something. And the interesting challenge is in the real historical part, that's UNESCO World Heritage. What are we going to do there? Well, what you can find there is the red light district at the moment. I don't know, have you been there? Men? But it's one of the famous areas in the Netherlands, of course. But we want to turn it together with local stakeholders in a green light district. So making it really sustainable. It's the most difficult part of Amsterdam probably, but if we can do it there, then we can do it everywhere. New York. But what are the options in the inner city? Well, there's three main options. One is radical energy renovation, meaning post-insulation everywhere, wrapping our buildings, putting PV panels everywhere. But then, of course, we lose our UNESCO World Heritage status. Second is district heating, expansion in the city, or replacing the natural gas that runs everywhere now by green gas. Biogas or hydrogen or synthetic methane. It's also possible in the future. Not now, it's too expensive, but maybe in the future. But I should say, if we use green gas in the inner city of Amsterdam, then it can not be used anywhere else, because we can't produce so much as to supply the whole city. Now, I think district heating is the nicest option actually, but then we have to put the pipes with the hot water in the canals because the streets are completely filled with infrastructure. We have to replace the gas boiler with a heat exchanger, and then this house can basically be the same. You don't have to do any post-insulation. It would be wise to do so because it saves energy and money, but you don't have to. So you can use the same radiators, and then the supply in geothermal heat, for instance, or solar heat that is being stored. Now the interesting thing is you can't touch the historical buildings, but there's houseboats everywhere in the canals in Amsterdam, if you've been there, and they can do anything. They can be wrapped up, they can have advertisements, they can have solar panels, so it's very easy to change them. And if they are being wrapped up and they have a heat pump, they can use the canals as heat source. Now that's interesting, because if the heat source extracts heat from the canals, then a law of physics says that the temperature will go down. And that means that in wintertime we can get freezing canals again. So this is now only rarely happening. In the past it used to be a whole winter that the canals could be frozen over. And now it's 1 or 2 days in a year. So Dutch people would love to see this again. So they complain about the energy transition, but if we can say, well, we make this possible because of the energy transition with heat pumps, then they're more likely to invest. And this is exactly what I wanted to introduce in Frisia. Maybe you've heard of the Elfstedentocht, the 11 Cities tour, a legendary ice skating tour that never happens. Well, the last time was in 1997. And now we have a record of number of days that it hasn't happened. And of course the Frisians are becoming desperate because with climate change the chance is becoming lesser, because it's already 1.4 degrees warmer in Holland than pre-industrial times. So then Holland has heated up more than the rest of the world. And the temperature will probably rise another 2 degrees. The chance, the probability of an ice skating tour like this is now only 2%, and it will go to 0.2 within the coming years. So is there hope to ever skate a Tour of Tours? Well, I think there is, because we have to simply connect the same idea that I presented about Amsterdam with the open water in Frisia, and link it to the energy transition of Frisian houses, which have to be fossil-free anyway within a few decades. And then we use the water as hydrothermia. And I suggested, well, if we put 10% of the Frisian households on that system, which is not a lot, it's probably more that's possible, then we would require about 10,000, some say 5,000 heat pumps. And these would heat up the houses in wintertime, and by doing that, they would decrease the temperature by 4 degrees. So that's a stronger decrease than the increase because of climate change. So finally, it would be possible to ice skate again. So that's when we think that the most famous and loved Frisian sentence, "It geert on," which means like it's going on, it's going to happen. It becomes possible again. So this is another example of added value because of climate adaptation. Now, since we're in a university, I thought it would be nice to show one example of what we are doing at TU Delft now. Because last summer I finished, together with a colleague of mine, the CO2 analysis of our TU Delft campus. And for instance, to look at our energy system, we have electricity in yellow, which is now imported wind energy, so you could say that's almost carbon neutral. And we have a lot of gas going into the district heating system and in boilers. And there's a little bit of PV, 1%, which is 1 megawatt, 100 megawatts on the roofs. We looked at the buildings and their energy consumption per square meter, and the TU Delft Campus and Real Estate Organization has said, well, we have to go to 50 kilowatt hours maximum for heating and 50 maximum for electricity. Well, to be in line with Paris, we should go to 50 maximum. Now they say 100 is good enough. Okay. Then we see that only a few buildings are good enough. And building 8 is my building. That's the Faculty of Architecture, after the renovation. One of the oldest buildings of TU Delft. So this is performing well, and you see some of them are really terrible. So we also have to do a bit. But we not just looked at buildings, also at travel, commuter travel. So we have the students, most of them live in Delft, they use bicycles or they come by train. There's only a few using a car. Employees, that's what you see on the right-hand side. And this is probably a very uncommon figure for Australia, but most of the people come by bicycle. It's the fastest way to get around in Delft. And some come by car and train, etc. So you see a nice division of what's happening there. We also look at flights. Since we have to book all our flights through our travel agency, we know how many segments, as they call them, are being requested every time. So we know that we travel about 33 million kilometers. This was 2018. So the average flight distance of an FTE, full-time equivalent of an employee, is 6,000 kilometers. It's quite a lot. I'm way above that, just simply by this flight. Okay. Then food, another one. If we look at the average Dutch diet, then this is the carbon emission of food. And here you see the different components. If you look at meat lovers, and you Australians are meat lovers, I know, with the barbecue, you are way higher than that. This is what I call a pesca vegetarian, a vegetarian that sometimes eats fish. This is a normal vegetarian, and this is a vegan. Is any vegan here in the room? Vegetarians? Oh, quite a lot. Good. Congratulations. Yeah. Well, as you know, I'm myself too. So we are about halfway the average of Australia. So that's good. Waste management, another thing. We produce a lot of waste at a university, and there's some organic waste which is being reprocessed, but a lot of it is unprocessed. And there's a lot of organic content here. So this is a real problem. We should be much smarter about this. Now looking at everything together, then this is the carbon footprint of TU Delft. Again, expressed in forest area, and what you see underneath in the grey line here is the municipality of Delft. This is TU Delft with its premises. So you see that basically 1.5 times the whole area of Delft has to be covered by forest to compensate for TU Delft. And TU Delft is just one of the organizations here, so everybody else also needs forest. So this is immense. So we're now working on plans, of course, to reduce that. Because we need a lot of forest land, and we, in the same time, know that forests are disappearing. If you look at the Amazon area at the moment, or Indonesia, Scandinavia has a growing content of forest, but that's one of the few parts. There's another reason why to do that, because there's going to be carbon taxing at some point in the near future. And if we have to pay for our carbon emissions at the moment at TU Delft would have to pay 1.2 million euros every year. That's based on the current price of CO2, like I paid for my own flights in 2018. But if we use the realistic price, which is the UN level, it's 130 euros per ton. Then TU Delft would have to pay 6.25 million euros every year. Well, if they're going to pay this in the near future, you better invest it now in something else. So you can use it to plant trees, of course, but it's smarter to avoid it. So I propose to the executive board to spend at least a part of that in big energy conversion projects and sustainability projects on campus. Well, to look at waste, for instance, an airport is also a collection point of a lot of waste. So airplanes come in with all the waste you created by eating stuff and not eating stuff, and then they leave again with clean water, with clean food, with clean fuels, and of course the waste of the fuels has been emitted in the sky. But in Holland, this is Schiphol Airport here, and waste is being transported long distances and then incinerated or processed somewhere. It's not very smart. So we came up with a proposal to actually recycle the waste locally on site of the airport to make it part of a circular economy of the region, and then produce food with it as well. And this links to basically some of you working on agriculture, because if we can start to produce food closer to home, then we save a lot on food miles, and the system can be part of the ecological system of a city as well. So at the moment, especially in the Netherlands, we have a lot of these horticulture areas close to Delft, by the way, and food may be produced in a very efficient way, but still has to be transported, especially since we produce a lot for foreign countries. What if we could combine them with buildings inside the city? That's the topic of a study of my PhD, Luc Gamans. So he's basically looking at combining, say, the urban systems with controlled environment food production, and then seeing opportunities there. So to be clear about the difference, these are typical greenhouses from horticulture, and these are so-called vertical farms that stack. I first thought that vertical farms were done in high-rises. No, it's about stacking food in different layers and creating the maximum optimal conditions for food growth. Now, the vertical farming is quite interesting because also here Tasmania is green, we are green. So there's a lot of areas in the world where vertical farming can be profitable. And it would lead to, for instance, this is a vacant office in the Netherlands. It could be used for high-tech food production behind the facades, but also internally. If you know, fungi can grow in shaded conditions, so they can be on the inside. The thing, however, is if you do this, you still need a lot of electricity for the climatization and for the lighting. So there's a lot of energy going into this system, but also a lot of waste heat coming out that has to be gotten rid of. Well, if you're in the middle of a city, that's no problem. In a city like ours, that also needs a lot of heat most of the time, then you just link into a sustainable city system. This is an example in Hong Kong. There you, of course, you have less demand for heat, but there's also an option to produce in high densities inside the inner city. Well, one of the big advantages is, for instance, that if the footprint of one building on the ground is much less than horticulture or than open land farming. So if you have lack of space, like we have in the Netherlands, then this obviously is a much more profitable option, or in China, in some cities. So this is one of the reasons why we could do this. Now, to finalize, I want to show you one example of the solar decathlon from last summer, because it sort of includes everything that I've explained so far. This was my team of students. I supervised it together with Peter de Jong, who was there for especially the expenses, cost calculations, and I supervised them on climate design and sustainability. What the students chose to do is not to look at another terraced house, but look at offices. We have a lot of offices in the Netherlands. Most of them are very inefficient. Some of them are vacant. Well, a large contingent is vacant. And I know that here in Australia you don't have these energy label systems for buildings like you have for fridges or other electric equipment. But in Europe we have that as standard from A to G. A is a good label, and most modern houses are made at A+++ at the moment. Most offices are very low on that ranking. And the Dutch government has said that by 2023 they all have to have energy label C or better. We know that 55% of them is not compliant yet, so we need to have hundreds of renovation projects in the coming years to get there, and it's not happening. So a lot of these offices will have to be demolished in due time. At the same time, we need to create 1 million homes in the Netherlands because of the growth of our populations and young people that cannot find any home anywhere. So the students chose to look at one of those inefficient offices and turn them into a net positive building for young people to live in. And a net positive not just in energy terms, also biomass, also air, water, and materials. Well, they're young people, and the advantage of young people is that they don't have to have individual cars themselves anymore these days because it's far too expensive. It's much better to have a shared system with other people. Same with washing machines. Why, if you use a washing machine three times a week, why would you have it for yourself? You can also share it with 20 other people and then use it much more efficiently. It would be much cheaper. Same with big rooms where you have a party. Not every house needs to have a party room, which you use once or twice per year. So if you share it with 20 other people, then it's much more efficient. The infill of such a house or building should also be flexible, because you never know what it's going to be in the future. Maybe in the future we need more offices again. I don't think so, or the typical tenants should be different. So a modular system was important. So a smart wet module with kitchen and bathroom, and a smart bedroom module that can be stowed away a bed so that you have a desk to work on. And such a house could be flexible in the different seasons, and also during day and night as part of the energy system as well, to be smarter with how you sort of use your house. The system they thought about is actually 3 times circular. So it's modular, it's demountable, and it's bio-based. So those are 3 qualities of circularity that are merged in one. And this is what it looks like in real time. Funny thing to know is that these nice fiber boards that you see here, the dark fibers are from hemp. So you know probably that the Netherlands is quite famous for other applications of hemp. This is one of the fiber uses. And this is the bedroom module. So it can be stowed away upwards. And here you see, say, the rough interior with the concrete structure. We also introduced a green wall through which air has been drawn in from outside, so that it's purified by the plants. So the plants were deliberately chosen to purify certain contaminants in the air, so that the air coming in is cleaner than outside. And this is what it looked like in real. It was also really improving the indoor air quality. We took these offices in Rotterdam as the basis. They used to be of the municipality, and now they're vacant. So the students came up with a solution for them. And of course we couldn't, for the competition, we couldn't build the whole tower, but we could take one pavilion, a little corner of this tower. We also introduced vertical PV in different colors, because photovoltaics doesn't look the same anywhere now these days. There's new products that look really nice in different colors, and we want to use those. Also because in the Netherlands the sun is more horizontal than vertical, and because vertical PV produces on east, south and west, produces more constant over the day, so more in the morning, more in the evening, and in wintertime also more than when you have roof panels to the south. So it's a much more efficient system. So this is the artist's impression of what it would look like. So in all the panels here are PV. So here you see it in real time. So this was in Hungary when it was constructed. And you don't recognize the PV anymore, right? So it's like typical office panels that have a color. We could have also chosen red or yellow. I would have preferred that, but the students were sort of modest in their choice. So this is what the solar village looked like. So this is this typical solar decathlon competition. So you see the university. This is from the team from France. This is the Belgians. This is the Barcelonan. This is Valencia. And here's our pavilion. So during 2 weeks, these pavilions are being measured in all sorts of things, and juries come along to assess which one has to win which competition. And we were called Modular Office Renovation, MORE, which was funny to use, of course, for many things. And we won a lot of prizes. So from the 10 competitions we won, we were on the podium, on the stage 8 times. So everybody thought that we were going to win easily. We were also way ahead of the other teams. But then the last day, something came in called politics, and then we just lost by 1.6 points of 1,000 points. Anyway, I'm not going into that because it's sort of sad, but we are the only team, at least, that eventually went to the Prime Minister of their country. So this is Mark Rutte, our Prime Minister, who was really interested. He invited us. We didn't ask to come. He invited us to come along and to explain the whole concept, because yeah, it's a project that basically also provides a solution for many of the issues in the Netherlands. Climate change, climate mitigation, circularity, and improvement of air quality and living quality. So this is what it was, and this is also where I want to end, and just to show that I think science in our times should not be just staying at the university and thinking about concepts and models. It's also about trying to test it in practice, and that's why I believe that universities should be living labs in themselves and being measured by researchers, students learning from it and being part of the experiment. That makes it really nice. So this is going to be at the TU Delft campus. It's being constructed now in Delft. It will be opened in January, and then it will be part of the exhibition and testing facilities again. So I hope also that the university here, Tasmania, can do such projects in your new campus. Thanks for your attention. I think if there's questions we need to...
Thank you very much, Andy,
Is
for
it on?
a very stimulating talk. It's certainly given me a lot to think about in terms of some of the discussions that are underway as we talk about our transformation of our facilities.
Thanks.
Yeah, we've got time for just 1 or 2 quick questions. Yeah.
Oh, sorry, I took far too much time. Sorry about that.
G'day, my name's Mike.
Hi.
I'm interested about how the Netherlands and the EU in general has validated the economics behind these transitions. A big continuing point here in Tasmania is that we don't have the money to do these kind of things, to upgrade our streets to more like a more sustainable built environment. So how has the EU kind of justified and validated their money side of things?
Well, there's two things. One is, of course, we have these climate agreements signed by all the countries, so they have to do something. So there's obligation there. You have to invest it. And you shouldn't see it as cost, you should see it as investments, because many of the energy investments are earning themselves back within a couple of years. Of course, you need to have the money first to do it, but once it's there, then you will save it after a few years. And I always say also, what does it cost if you don't do anything? Because those costs will be much, much higher if we wait too long with this transition. And there's economics that have calculated that the longer we wait, the more expensive that will be, dealing with the disasters coming forth from that.
Yeah, I think we're seeing that with the drought in New South Wales at the moment, where we didn't really have a dry-up plan over the last 20 years, and we didn't sort of adapt any of our systems to be more sustainable in the long term. And then it's not just the money side of it; it's the human well-being and the health of those communities, and the mental health of the farmers and the next generations and all that sort of stuff. So I think it's also about like wrapping up all like the greater costs, not just the financial expenditure, I suppose.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think we have enough money. We prosperous countries have enough money. Most of our money is in insurances, is in pensions, in savings. If we could use that for the right investments rather than sending it to fossil companies or weapon industries, and we could do a lot, I think. Yeah. But I agree, also us scientists should focus on the merits to society, to people, to nature, and what it brings as extra value. So social sciences are becoming ever more important there. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I missed the middle bit. I was listening, and then my student came, and then I had to speak to her, and then I came here. So this might have been answered, so I'm sorry. So we live on a boat as a part of being odd. Yes, that's true, for lots of reasons. And we've found that the transition from even a small apartment to a boat where the floor space is less than one piece of plywood that you buy in, the Bunnings, whatever. We found that actually really easy. And what we've also found is that there are lots of benefits to using shared facilities. And my question is really around whether you have looked into the benefits of using shared facilities as well as obviously the financial benefits.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what I didn't tell, maybe you saw that one of the prizes we won with the student team was on innovation and viability. And viability really looked at financial feasibility as well. And a great feat there was the sharing of facilities, which made the investments for people individually much lower, creating more quality in the living space they have in their own apartment. So the sharing economy is quite interesting from a financial point of view. I can't show the calculations the student made, but they came up with really good quality apartments for young people, but the rental price would be lower than a common apartment at the moment. So it can be much more interesting.
So I guess my question is really around whether there's ways of valuing the other benefits. So not just financial benefits, but other social benefits of having shared facilities. Yeah,
it's difficult to because most people talk in money, but of course, this is something that people need to feel. I cannot translate the benefit of having a Elfstedentocht, the 11 cities tour, again, back in the Netherlands. Well, you can calculate how many tourists will come because of that and how many television broadcasts it will lead to, but the feeling of doing this again, a legendary tour like that, we can't translate it in money. So it's something people need to feel, and some things people immediately feel like, wow, this is great if we can do this, or if I can make my city green and make it much more livable, and my children can play on the street again, rather than being run over by cars all the time. All the time. You know what I mean. So, yeah, really try to appeal on those values also. Yeah.
I've got a question. It's interesting when we think about the similarities and the differences between Australia and the Netherlands, for example. Even, for example, the way we build our houses. I mean, that's an interesting one, isn't it? We have the biggest houses, they're getting bigger. We think we have the right to really big living spaces and not having to share them, our own washing machines, just the list goes on. But we also are very used to living in not very well constructed houses. So you're talking about upgrading, making things more sustainable that have been already around for several hundred years, whereas we're used to living in houses that we expect that are going to only live for 20 odd years, and they're poorly designed in the first place. You did comment that there's going to be some places that will be knocked down if they don't do the upgrades. How do you see that playing out? Because, I mean, that's a massive overturning of everything, isn't it? Of resources and space and people's families and everything.
Of course, yeah. Well, with the first plan of a solar decathlon of the Dutch terraced house, those were also houses that many people said, well, tear them down and replace them with new ones. But we have 1.4 million of those in the Netherlands. So the students said it's ridiculous. We will show that it's possible to renovate them and make them better, even though they were also poorly constructed right after World War II. It's not that, well, of course, at the moment, the legislation in the Netherlands and the EU is, I think, further than in Australia regarding energy performance. And that helps a lot, because that makes it mandatory to invest in energy measurements. And then you need insulation, and you need heat recovery, and so on. I believe that's not necessary here. So it's all considered as extra money, extra investments, changes that you don't want. So I think the government here has an obligation to do something in that direction. Is anybody from the government here?
So one final question, because you've got an ABC reporter waiting for you, I believe.
And an airplane flying at 6 o'clock.
Flight out at 6.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Thanks, Andy. Well, as the Netherlands and Dutch is mainly dealing with the lot of agricultural commodity they are exporting and importing, even though, do you think that the building of the shared processing and handling facilities for that country, which is one of the major exporter and importer of the quality, and it has any impact on the environment?
It has a big impact, and I didn't tell you, but we have a standstill at the moment in the Netherlands because there's no construction works anywhere allowed anymore, because the country has surpassed nitrogen levels by far, and most of those nitrogen levels have been created by agriculture and livestock farming. So the only solution to come out of that is reduce the livestock and to get to a circular way of farming. And the circular way of farming needs the city as well, because farming, plants can grow on nutrients coming from the city, from wastewater, organic waste material, that they can supply back again to the city. So I think we need to get to much more synergetic systems that combine food, water and energy and material production, and keeping it closer to home and not transporting it all over the world. I can't tell this in the Netherlands because it's a country that has become rich because of the export of especially food and other goods, but we now notice that the Dutch biosystem is at a terrible state, so it has to change. Yeah. And I guess also in a beautiful island as Tasmania, with still a lot of ecological value, also the industries and farming here should be really trying to improve that quality rather than decrease it. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And I think in Tasmania that we are a beautiful island, but there is a lot going on that we are not measuring, and especially, as you heard this morning, in the dairy industry, we've increased by threefold the amount of nitrogen that we're losing, and and that's horrendous. So at the moment, I think we rely on our awareness of what's going on in other places of the world to actually influence what we can do in Tasmania, what we are aware of in Tasmania, what we measure in Tasmania, and what our future actions should be. So I think your talk was great in stimulating those kind of thoughts and how we move forward in Tasmania. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you so much, Caroline. Thanks for being here.